was really emotionally paralyzed by a need to know forgiveness that they couldn't seem to find. Because that's what Jesus offers in this story. He doesn't know theoretically this person and what's going on, but there seems to be, this sense, right, that he needs to know forgiveness. Now, Jesus clearly isn't the victim. Jesus doesn't have a need to forgive this person. But Jesus very clearly is the symbol of the divine presence in this person's life, who comes to them and says, unconditionally, you are a child of God. You are deserving and worthy and sacred and loved no matter what, unconditionally. And what you need most to hear is that you're forgiven. What if that's what the story's about? What if that person needed to know a healing of heart and soul, to stand up tall in front of family and friends and community, to be able to walk, to be able to live life abundantly by being healed of that inner trauma? So, when I say the word forgiveness, when I say we're going to talk about Jesus' gift of forgiveness here, my guess is that most of our thoughts go immediately to those people we need to forgive. And perhaps our thoughts go to a place of, that person hurt me so badly I can never forgive them, and there's nothing you can do, Kaye, to convince me that I should forgive them. And I get it. But guess not. We're not talking about that today. I want to talk about a different aspect of forgiveness. I want to go in a different door, or perhaps in through the roof today, and talk about forgiveness that's maybe harder. Because I want to talk about self-forgiveness. What does it take to forgive ourselves? Sometimes it's easy to just keep looking at others that we need to forgive. It's easy to look outside rather than inside on this journey of life we're on. I was reading one book on forgiveness, and it was an anthology. And every chapter but one was on forgiving other people. There was only one chapter on forgiving self. Because, gosh, it's so much easier to talk about somebody else than to talk about ourselves, to look at ourselves. But on this crazy spiritual journey we're on, all aspects of forgiveness are important to our own wholeness and healing. The forgiving of others, the asking forgiveness, and the forgiving of self. So, this is where we're going today. I ask you to think about for a minute a time when you screwed up. A time when you made a mistake. What did it feel like? How did you feel when you've done that? Upset?
Embarrassed.
Embarrassed? Guilty? Ashamed, perhaps? Humble? Worried? Maybe worthless? Maybe alone? Phony? Maybe phony? These are a lot of tough feelings that we're asked to deal with if we're going to deal with self-forgiveness. So, the first thing that I guess I need to say is that when we're in that position, this may seem obvious, but the first thing we have to do when we've recognized that we've screwed up is seek to make it right. It's kind of a no-brainer. But as hard as it is to do, the first thing we need to do is to say we're sorry, to try to make amends, to make reparations if we need to. And it doesn't matter how long it took us to figure that out, it's still important that we say those words, that we seek that healing. But saying those words, even if it's 2 years later, can sometimes be more for us, or at least as much for us as it is for someone else. So it's important. Sometimes it takes us a while to get it, right? Or to own up to it, or be willing to really look at it. It's important that we take responsibility, that we be accountable, and that we try and make it right. Sometimes the person that we've hurt is gone. Sometimes they've passed away. Sometimes they've moved away. We don't know where they are. And so we have to seek other ways to try and ask forgiveness. Sometimes we write a letter. Maybe share it with somebody else. Maybe we write a letter and burn it in the fireplace. There used to be an apology hotline that ran for about 15 years in New York because a guy by the name of Mark Bridges realized that it was important for people to be able to apologize even if they did it anonymously, even if they couldn't do it to the person or whoever that they hurt, that they be able to voice it, to share their guilt, their shame, their whatever. And so he ran this hotline for 15 years. It went to an answering machine, but it logged over 1,000 hours of people calling up and apologizing for all kinds of things. Come to find out, who knew, you can still go on the internet, and you can go to apologyline.com and pretty much do the same thing. There are ways to, and actually you can go on and you can get scripts for how to apologize to somebody these days. Words to help you do it for all kinds of different situations. It was fascinating. But a recognition that it's a deep need for all of us to continue to move forward in life. So have you ever, all of those feelings that we just named, the shame and the guilt and the pain and the shame, whatever we said, I lost them all. When you feel all of those things, whether you've been forgiven or not, maybe you've sought forgiveness and it was given, maybe you sought forgiveness and it wasn't given. Have you ever had a time where you couldn't let it go for yourself? Where you couldn't forgive yourself? Where you couldn't let go of all those negative emotions? I know I've been there. Why is it that we can't let go? Why is it that it's so hard to forgive ourselves?
Because we expect so much better of ourselves.
Because we expect better of ourselves.
Feels like you're saying it was okay.
Feels like you're saying it was okay. I think sometimes it's self-punishment is what we feel we deserve. They may forgive me, but I'm never going to forgive myself. God can forgive me, but I'm never going to forgive myself. Which makes us bigger than God, which is a fascinating statement. Sometimes I think we tell other people that we'll forgive them, and yet we still carry some grudge and some hurt and some pain, and so we haven't really forgiven them. So how can somebody else really forgive us if I really can't forgive someone else? Right? There are all kinds of reasons we want to hang on to that, even after we've tried to make it right. And then what happens is that we become paralyzed by it, by not forgiving ourselves. What does that do? What does that look like, to be paralyzed by our own lack of self-forgiveness?
Aging.
I'm sorry?
Aging makes you age.
It makes you age, sure.
One of the things that I have experienced myself is that I've carried something like that for a long, long time and then tried to make amends, and the person doesn't even remember the incident or what I've said.
Sure, sometimes we carry it for much longer than the person did,
Right.
right? And so you just serve to weigh yourself down. And what does that do to us, to hold that for so long? You know, I think it takes a toll, body, mind, and spirit. I think it's a corrosive piece inside of us that literally eats away at us. I think sometimes it stops us from having similar friendships or similar relationships because we're afraid we'll screw up again and not meet our expectations again. Sometimes it keeps us from moving forward in a healthy, whole way. Not forgiving ourselves can paralyze us from having a full, wonderful life. So, let me share a story about a young woman named Kelly. When she was 17, she was driving her 12-year-old sister to school one morning. And she was going a little fast. She was going about 10 miles over the speed limit. She was going up a hill, coming over the rise, and as she came over the rise, she was looking in her rearview mirror and did not see the woman who was crossing the street until it was too late. And she struck and killed a 70-year-old woman. It was a mistake, but it was an accident. It wasn't too long before the woman's family was able to forgive Kelly. But she couldn't forgive herself. And her mother didn't help. Her mother, from the time it happened, said, "We are never talking about this again." And so Kelly was isolated, and she was humiliated, and she was full of shame and guilt and pain that she lived with and lived with and lived with. How could I have done something like this? I don't deserve to live. Am I really such a horrible monster inside that I could kill somebody else? For 30 years, she lived with that self-condemnation, that self-hatred, that deep pain. And it didn't go away slowly, it took years and years and years for her to finally be able to speak about it, to let it go, to forgive herself. And now she speaks publicly about how she went from silence to self-forgiveness. A healing and an inner journey, so important. And I'm not only talking these huge things that happen to us. Sometimes I'm talking about little things or littler things. Maybe, I don't think I've told this story. You all know that my mom died when I was 17. What I don't talk about a lot, because it still has a little ounce of pain to it, is that we were not a terribly emotionally open family. And so I was a pretty self-centered 17-year-old, doing my thing, having my fun. And we got closer. My mom was sick for a year and a half with cancer. And we got closer to her end. When my dad came up to me and said, Kaye, your mom would really like it. It would really mean a lot to her if you would tell her you love her. Apparently I hadn't done that. And even the thought of doing it was difficult. So I finally bought a poster with a picture of a hot air balloon on it. I can still see what it looks like. I can't tell you what the poster said anymore. But at the very bottom, in little teeny tiny letters, I wrote, "Dear Mom, I love you, Kaye." It never felt like enough. It felt very inadequate for a lot of years. And I have done a lot of self-reflection, introspection, talking through it with people, trying to understand my family, my situation, what it means to be a 17-year-old, all of those things. And I have finally at least come to a place where I recognize that I was not given the tools to do what was needed at the time. My mother was a fairly closed person. She didn't share much about what was going on. My family, we were told that she was dying of cancer, and then I don't remember talking about it again for a year and a half. She went through the process. We knew where she was going and what she was doing, but nobody talked about how to do this. So I finally came to a place of self-forgiveness around it. I can't say anything to her. I can't tell her. I've written her letters. But I've had to release the burden that had been on me, the paralysis that was on my life, and who I was and how I felt about myself. Makes sense? So, I've got to read this piece from Desmond Tutu because he says it much better than I can ever say it. Forgiving yourself is not a way to excuse what you have done or gloss over the harm you've caused others. It's not about forgetting your actions. It is, in fact, an honest remembering of what you've done and how you've hurt others. Self-forgiveness is not a loophole to avoid admitting wrongs or making restitution. Self-forgiveness is true acceptance. What that means is that you come to accept yourself as a flawed human being. He goes on to say a few other things. He said, self-forgiveness requires absolute truth. With yourself first, and with the people that you've harmed second. It does not require the forgiveness of the person that you hurt. Doesn't mean you don't try and make it right, but you can still forgive yourself without having received forgiveness. And it requires humility and vulnerability and hard work to not do it again. Because it means we try really hard to learn and grow and be better. I want to read you this poem. Again, by Tutu. I'm generous to you and miserly to me. I can banish the harm you caused me from the smallest corner of my heart. It has no root or residence in me. But the deed I have done fills me with shame and pain. I cannot make myself whole again. I cannot forgive myself. If my tender heart is truly there for you, it must be tender for me too. Soft and yielding, kind and forgiving. I must allow myself to come face to face with my own humanity. I can break free. The evangelical, conservative, fundamentalist arm of Christianity is happy to tell people over and over again that they are miserable, rotten sinners, and to paralyze them in fear for their mortal souls. This story directly contradicts that. This story is Jesus symbolizing the divine, saying, you are a sacred, beautiful human being who is forgivable, unconditionally. It's not saying that you didn't screw up. It's not saying that you don't need to take action to make it right, but it's saying we should not be held and are not held in that muck of self-condemnation and pain and stuntedness for all of eternity. The divine is about unconditional love and forgiveness, not about asking us to be emotional masochists. Jesus very clearly said, we are all beautiful souls. We are all forgiven. Stand up, take your mat, and walk. Amen.